Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. In today's video, I'll be talking about genetics and evolution, specifically about phylogenetic trees which contradict each other. This is a massive argument against evolution and an extremely important one. Let's get started. So, here's the basic background. Genes are sections of DNA which are instructions in living things for producing molecules, usually protein. Each living thing has a massive amount of genes. A phylogenetic tree can be produced using each gene, basically a version of the tree of life. This basically shows the history of life. If universal common ancestry is true, then each gene should give approximately the same tree. And I'll give a reference for this that this is the evolutionary claim. This is actually not the case that these genes don't give the same tree. This is usually presented by atheists as one of the biggest arguments for evolution, but actually it's one of the biggest arguments against evolution. Now, just so you don't think I'm making this up, I'll give a reference from Richard Dawkins himself. This is the reference. Comparative DNA evidence can be used to decide on the evolutionary assumption which pairs of animals are closer cousins than which others. What turns this into extremely powerful evidence for evolution is that you can construct a tree of genetic resemblances separately for each gene in turn. Again, what I said earlier. And the important result is that every gene delivers approximately the same tree of life. Once again, this is exactly what you would expect if you are dealing with a true family tree. So this is basically the atheist argument in this regard, right? The evolutionary argument. And it's exactly what I mentioned earlier. Here's a simple refutation of this. These genes do not give the same approximate tree of life. Richard Dawkins is lying about this, and in an earlier video, I've given numerous references for this. This is actually recognized by most evolutionary biologists who have to come up with ad hoc explanations for this phenomena of contradictory phylogenetic trees, the main one being horizontal gene transfer. Ad hoc basically means an explanation. An ad hoc explanation is an explanation that has been formed or used for a special and immediate purpose without previous planning, meaning they did not expect this to be there. This is basically what ad hoc is. They are just coming up with a later explanation to justify this point. Of course, these clowns will try to defend their faith in evolution, but they will admit that this is not what is expected on evolution. The simple fact that they have to come up with ad hoc explanations shows that this cannot possibly be evidence for evolution. Because if it was, there was no need for ad hoc explanations like this. Moreover, because these explanations don't work, this is a massive refutation for evolution. So this is one reference regarding phylogenetic trees contradicting each other, and that lateral gene transfer or horizontal gene transfer was came basically invented for this reason. And I have given others in an earlier video as well. So what is horizontal gene transfer, and why? Uh, Basically, what is this counter explanation that they are coming with? The classical evolutionary theory is that genes are only transferred from parents to offspring. Like a parent will pass off their genes to their children. This is vertical gene transfer. Suppose a bacteria transferred a gene to a monkey. That would be horizontal gene transfer. They are Here's the issue. They are just claiming that any case of genes not being where they are expected to be is a case of horizontal gene transfer. They cannot test it. This is just their ad hoc explanation. In cases of single cell organism, this is a observed process and happens all the time. So there it is a reasonable explanation. It still causes problems for them, but in that case, in case of single cell organisms like bacteria, it works as an explanation. However, there is very little observational evidence of horizontal gene transfer occurring in multicellular organisms such as plants and animals, and this is the main problem. That even in cases where there is very little observational evidence of horizontal gene transfer, this explanation is being invoked. And in fact, this is an extremely controversial topic in evolutionary biology, where many evolutionary biologists are actually challenging that horizontal gene transfer takes place in multicellular organisms. Like they themselves are saying this is a problem. Now I'll just give one reference in this regard. I will link the article from where I'm getting it from Science Daily, and they are actually referencing a published paper in this regard as well. So here's the basic reference: the transfer of genes, and this will confirm what I said earlier about this being contested or controversial in the case of multicellular organisms. The transfer of genes between organisms living in the same environment is known as horizontal gene transfer. It is well known in single cell organisms and is thought to be an important process that explains how quickly bacteria evolve, for example, resistance to antibiotics. HGT is thought to play an important role in the evolution of some animals, including nematode worms, which have acquired genes from microorganisms and plants, and some beetles that gain bacterial genes to produce enzymes for digesting coffee beans. However, the idea that HGT occurs in more complex animals, such as humans, rather than them solely gaining genes directly from ancestors, has been widely debated and contested. This is a controversial issue, and in complex plants, this is an issue as well. Now, this was a paper published where they are basically claiming that because the genes don't give the same tree of life, it is a case of horizontal gene transfer. Lead author Alistair Crisp from the University of Cambridge, UK said, "This is the first study to show how widely horizontal gene transfer occurs in animals, including humans, giving rise to tens or hundreds of thousands or hundreds of active foreign genes. Surprisingly, far from being a rare occurrence, it appears that HGT has contributed to evolution in many, perhaps all animals, and that the process is ongoing." Here's the issue with this. Here's what they are doing. I'm giving you in plain language. The trees contradict each other, right? And this happens in plants and complex animals. In fact, in most animals, right? As he's saying. To explain this, to save this, like from being an error or a contention against evolution, they are coming up with horizontal gene transfer. But the problem is there is little observational evidence for this in complex animals, as this paper said. In fact, there is a reason this is widely contested among evolutionists, like it mentioned here, because there is little observational evidence in this regard. So here's the problem, and it's actually quite an interesting one. The fact that genes can be transferred horizontally is a possible explanation, but this also causes massive problem for evolution. There are genes that, and here's the reason why. There are genes that evolutionists expect to be where they are, and genes that evolutionists don't expect to be where they are. They are trying to use horizontal gene transfer as an explanation for the second type that they don't expect, but it could just as easily be used as an explanation for the first time that they expect to be in their particular places. In that case, the common descent argument, the argument for universal common ancestry, is significantly weaker. Why? Because the assumption is that similarity is due to common descent, right? This is the assumption in that. But this similarity can just as well be due to horizontal gene transfer. In this case, their argument for universal common ancestry is dead. Moreover, in the case of animals and some plants, they are just assuming this process happens and they are not bothering to test their assumption. And actually, I'll give references for them not bothering to test their assumption. This is one reference for this. This is another reference from this reference is mentioned here. For this reference, I'll link the article in the video description. UC Davis microbiologist and molecular systematist Jonathan Eisen actually writes, this is on his website and I will link this. Many researchers show evidence that is consistent with the occurrence of horizontal gene transfer, but few actually test explicitly alternative hypotheses. I think their work is yeah, and you can read those alternatives. I think their work is certainly interesting, but they have not just tested all of the alternatives. So they are just assuming it's there. They are not actually testing alternate hypotheses. They are just assuming it's there. So now I gave one logical problem for evolution in this regard. That again it uh, it basically challenges the logic of universal common ancestry. There's another problem here, and this is a big one. For something to be scientific evidence, it has to be falsifiable. If phylogenetic trees are similar and do not contradict each other, that is compatible with and evidence of evolution, according to them. If phylogenetic trees are contradictory, that is compatible with and evidence of evolution because of horizontal gene transfer, according to them. For something to be scientific evidence, it has to be falsifiable. But this is not falsifiable, and the reason is very simple, that if they are similar, it's evidence. It fits with evolution. If they are not similar, it fits with evolution just as well. How can it possibly be evidence for evolution in that case? Because in any case, it matches with it is compatible with evolution, and in that case, it's not falsifiable. For something to be scientific evidence, it has to be falsifiable, but this simply cannot be falsifiable. That's the problem. There's another massive problem here, namely that all of the explanations given in this regard, right, to explain that phylogenetic trees are contradictory. The main explanation is horizontal gene transfer, but there are other explanations as well. The problem here is all of these explanations are ad hoc. The atheist will routinely claim that common design as an explanation for similarity is in living things is an ad hoc explanation. This is their usual claim in this regard. It is not an ad hoc explanation, but let's ignore that for now. The problem that horizontal gene transfer the problem in this regard is that horizontal gene transfer and similar hypotheses are ad hoc as well. So are they trying to have their cake and eat it as well? They are rejecting common design because it's ad hoc, but they are taking ad hoc explanations in this case, such as horizontal gene transfer and other similar hypotheses. Again, what's the standard here? Their claims, their claim with ad hoc explanations are wrong and should not be taken as evidence. Guess what? That refutes horizontal gene transfer in animals and other similar hypotheses that they come up with to explain contradictions in phylogenetic trees. And this is supposed to be one of the strongest or the strongest evidence for evolution according to Richard Dawkins. I think you can see how pathetic the atheist position is. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Till next time, Assalamu alaikum.